In today's video, I'm going to show you the cheap way to upgrade the storage in pretty much most recent Macs. This video is sponsored by PDFelement for Mac, which allows you to create and edit PDFs straight from Microsoft Office or other file types, convert PDFs into Microsoft Office formats, and even edit scanned documents by converting them into PDFs, all right from your Mac. Check out the link in the description below to access a free trial of PDFelement today. So about 18 months ago, I would have told you that upgrading the SSD in a Retina MacBook Pro was not cost effective at all. This particular MacBook Pro originally shipped with a 512GB solid state drive. And because Apple uses proprietary drives, this would have run you about $275. $275 for a half terabyte SSD. But we had no other choice because the only options were buying an original Apple drive or buying an OWC drive, which was similarly expensive. But since those olden times, two key things have changed. Number one, SSDs are a lot less expensive than they used to be. And number two, macOS now natively supports NVMe SSDs. So let's jump straight into the SSD upgrade. Now, I purchased this MacBook Pro without an SSD, so we're going to be putting in an SSD from scratch. Now, there is one complication. Because I purchased this Retina MacBook Pro on eBay with no SSD installed, I don't know what version of macOS it was running when I bought it. So because I want to simplify this process as much as possible by having the absolute most recent version of macOS installed, I grabbed this external SSD and plugged it in over USB and installed the most recent version of Mojave. That way the boot ROM, which is going to be there regardless of whether you have an SSD installed or not, is going to be the absolute latest version. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at the SSD that I bought. I just grabbed this thing from Micro Center. It was $60. It's a 512GB SSD. Doesn't matter what storage option you go for, any M-key NVMe M.2 SSD will work. Okie dokie. So now that we have this thing opened, we're only going to need one more thing, which I have in my handy dandy pocket here, and that is this adapter. This is just a physical adapter that's going to map the pins from our NVMe drive to the pins for the MacBook Pro's SSD slot. So we'll just fit those together nice and snug, and there we go. Now, let's go ahead and flip over our MacBook Pro, and we are going to open this thing up and replace the SSD. Now, while I'm doing this, it is worth noting that this is a 15-inch Retina MacBook Pro, but this trick is going to work on a whole host of MacBooks. If you have a MacBook Pro, any Retina machine from late 2013 to mid-2015 will work. MacBook Airs from mid-2013 to 2017 will work. I believe iMacs from late 2013 that have either Fusion drives or pure SSDs, they use these same exact drives. The Mac Pro from late 2013, I think some Mac Minis do as well, but I'm not sure exactly which models. Pop off the back case. I haven't actually opened this computer yet. It's probably pretty dusty. It's not too bad. I'll clean it out later. So with the back off, you can see right here is where our SSD is going to go, and all we have to do to get it to fit in here is unscrew this small retaining screw, which I believe is actually a different screw bit. I think it's a Torx T5. That's going to be my educated guess. Let's see. Bingo, Torx T5 screw. And again, this is also going to be the same whether you're in this MacBook Pro or a MacBook Air or a Mac Pro or whatever. They all use the same screws. Then I'm just going to line up the notch on the SSD and push it in. And then once it's in, we're just going to screw down the retention screw, and that's literally it. From a hardware perspective, this is a ridiculously simple process. But now let's go through the process of formatting this drive and setting it up. So you can ignore this Utilities tab. The flash drive that I'm using actually has the DOS-Dude macOS Mojave patcher, but we don't need to worry about that because this machine is natively supported, so I'm just using this for the macOS installation. Hello. So if I go through to the macOS installer and I hit continue, you'll notice the SSD isn't showing up. Now this is because when you buy a new SSD, it's going to come unformatted. So we have to go ahead and format it ourselves. So we're going to go ahead and launch Disk Utility, and you'll see our internal PCIe SSD media. When we go to erase this disk and format it, we're going to give it a name. I'll call it Macintosh SSD, and for the format, I'm just going to leave it with macOS Extended Journaled. Okay, so for the sake of simplicity, we want to keep our format the same as whatever was previously on here. So I updated this thing to Mojave so that I knew what version was running on here, and it was running in macOS Extended Journaled. So we want to stick with that. If you have had Mojave on your computer before and you had it formatted APFS, then you want to stick with APFS. And then we're good to go ahead and install macOS Mojave on our new upgraded SSD. So I'm going to come back after macOS Mojave has finished installing on this MacBook Pro, and we're going to see how fast this SSD is compared to the standard stock SSD. So now that macOS is installed on the MacBook Pro, let's see just how fast that SSD is. So in order to give us an idea of how well it's done on our newly upgraded MacBook Pro, we're going to do a bit of a comparison. So I've brought along my MacBook Pro, which is actually identical. These are both late 2013 2.6 gigahertz i7s with 16 gigs of RAM, NVIDIA graphics, and 512 gigabyte SSDs. They are identical computers apart from the SSD. So we are going to see just how much faster our new and cheaper SSD is compared to the original Apple SSD, which this machine has. So let's start with a baseline read-write test of the original Apple SSD. So it looks like we're getting about 700 megabytes per second read and write speeds, which is respectable, definitely good compared to a SATA SSD, but nothing too special. And now over to our new upgraded SSD, and keep in mind that this was one of the least expensive SSDs I could find, so it's definitely not going to be the fastest that you'll be able to buy. So we're looking at about 1300 read, 1300 write. That's almost double the speed of a standard Apple SSD. And here's the real kicker. Even though Apple SSDs have become less expensive, they used to be $275, $300, you still have to shell out like $150 for a 500 gigabyte Apple SSD. So you're paying more than double the money to get half the speed. I mean, that pretty much says it all, doesn't it? That's crazy. Alright, so at this point in the video, let's talk a little bit about this particular MacBook Pro, because I haven't really said too much about it. I revealed what the specs were just very briefly. So what this is a late 2013 15-inch MacBook Pro with Retina display with pretty much the maxed out spec. This thing has the 2.6 gigahertz Intel Core i7-4960HQ, 16 gigabytes of RAM, NVIDIA GT750M graphics with 2 gigs of VRAM. This thing is pretty much kitted out, except for obviously you can add a larger SSD than what I've added. Now, I paid $450 for this machine. It was in a wholesale lot, and all in, when you consider the SSD, we're talking $450 with free shipping for the device itself, plus $60 for this SSD, plus another $9 for the adapter, and we are looking at a total of $519. I would say that this computer on eBay would fetch somewhere around $750, maybe more, but I think the cosmetic damage might hold it back a little bit. Once we subtract selling fees, this computer would probably net me $660 if I were to sell this today, which would be a pretty decent $140 profit over what I spent on this machine. Now, obviously that's not a ton of money if you're looking to flip a MacBook Pro, but if you are looking to save a lot of money buying a MacBook Pro without an SSD and then adding one in yourself, this is a really fantastic way to go, because not only are we getting a significantly less expensive MacBook Pro, keep in mind we're saving like $200 over what this machine goes for on eBay, but we're also getting an SSD that's going to be faster and snappier than what you would normally get. So overall, I would say that this has been an incredibly successful endeavor. We've got a lot of equity, a very good MacBook Pro deal. I kind of just got this thing because I wanted to try it out for a video, but it ended up being a really good deal. So let me know down in the comments below if you think I got a good deal on this MacBook Pro and if you think this SSD upgrade was worth it. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Miani and join my subreddit if you have any questions. And with that, I will see you in the next video.